a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Millsy. Back on the hometown commander, we're back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the commander in front of us on my quest to out-brew your favorite Magic channel. As always, deck list is in the description for your viewing and editing pleasure. It didn't feel right to go through Wilds of Eldraine and not do one deck surrounding food. So I decided to check out Greta, Sweettooth Scourge, our signpost uncommon legendary creature for food, and I have to say it's not bad. I think if I was going to build a food deck, I'd probably build like a Jaheira and Agent of the Iron Throne deck, but we already covered that on the channel. What I wanted to do is look at Greta and see how it would be different. So 3 mana 3/3 human warrior says when she enters the battlefield, create a food token. We can pay green, sacrifice food to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and we can only do that at sorcery speed. We can pay 1 and a black and sack a food to draw a card and lose a life. So black-green, food, going heavy on the black this week, but hey, it's fun. What we're going to try to do is pay as many food as we can, take advantage of either sacrificing those food or gaining the life from sacrificing the food if we want to, and try to benefit as much as we can. Starting off with the mana base, trying to play the new Restless Cottage to see if it's any good. They're very attack, so we create a food token, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard, so that could be kind of cool. We're playing the Shire, Witch's Cottage, and Gingerbread Cabin, which all have that Eldraine, these two have that Eldraine vibe, and the Shire, of course, makes a token, a food token, if we want to. Tried my best to put in Woodland Chasm and Haunted Mire because we're playing some forest-typed ramp cards, so we want to make sure we have the ability to go get some forests rather than just our basic forests. Getting into the enchantments, and we're pushing the cost of the deck a little bit with our doubling season and our parallel lives, but I think that's going to become important because we have things that care about how many food we have things that care about tokens coming in, so I think at the end of the day, doubling season and parallel lives are important. They're cards that are going to help us in the long run. Age of the Iron Throne says when it's out and Greta's out, that Greta has whenever an artifact or creature we control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses a life. So anytime we sacrifice a food for an artifact or use it, everybody loses 1. Hardened Scales, going to go ahead and put an extra counter on every creature that we choose to use Greta's first ability with if we want to do that. Killer Service is kind of a fun card. When it enters the battlefield, we make a number of foods equal to the number of opponents we can have, so that's probably going to always be 3. And then the bottom ability says at the beginning of our end step, we can pay 2 and sack a token. If we do, we create a 4/4 Rhino. So we can pay 2, get rid of a food, and make a Rhino token. And if we have an ability out that cares about that token leaving the battlefield, then we would get that. One of the new cards that's kind of interesting, and I think if you only read the first part of it, you'd be like, 4 mana, make a food. This is pretty terrible. But the further you go down, I think the more you realize how good this card is. So for 4 mana, it comes in, we get 1 food. It says foods you control have tap, add a green mana, so it turns all of our food into green mana rocks. And then it says 7 mana, sack it, and creatures we control gets +X/+X on the turn where X is the number of foods we control, and that happens only at sorcery speed. I like the idea of that because it's kind of a overrun type effect without the trample, but hey, you never quite know. We could have a bunch of creatures, get in some good attacks, and buff them up. Sanguine Bond, it just feels right in a deck where we're going to try to gain some life. Whenever we gain life, target opponent loses that much life. I like this because every time we sack a food, if Sanguine Bond's out, someone loses 3 as well. Trail of Crumbs, a card that's very well played in other food decks. This is when it comes in, we get a food, but it says whenever we sacrifice a food, whether through its own effect or other effects, we can pay 1. If we do, look at the top 2, put 1 in, put a permanent from among them into our hand, and the other on the rest on the bottom. I like this because we can dig through our deck every time we sacrifice a food, whether it's to Greta's effect or to its own effect, and see if we can get some more fun stuff. And then Welcome to the Sweettooth is pretty cool. On the first one, we get a human. On the second one, we get a food token. And then on 3, we get to put X++1 counters on a creature where X is the number of foods we control. We can buff up Greta, try to go for commander damage if we want to, buff up another creature. I just like it. For 2 mana, we're getting a creature token, a food, and potentially a big buff. Getting them into the artifacts, again, we're not playing as many mana rocks in the deck because we're a green deck, so we're going to rely on that land ramp a little bit more. But we are playing some pretty fun cards. We have the Arcane Signet and the Soul Ring for our mana rocks themselves. We have a couple artifacts that are foods themselves. Golden Egg, when it comes in, we draw a card. We can pay one and sack it to make a mana of any color, so we can filter a mana through. Or for 2, we can get the same food type effect. We're playing Lembas from the Lord of the Rings set. When it comes in, we scry one and draw a card. We can do the same food effect, sack it, gain 3 life. And it says when it put in the graveyard from the battlefield, its owner shuffles it into their library. We're playing a pair of cards that are going to help us benefit from the number of foods we have. Cranial Plating gives a creature +1/+0 for each artifact we control, and we can actually pay double black to equip it at instant speed. And then Nettle Cyst comes in and makes us a token and attaches to it, gives it +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment we control. Or we can unequip that token, which will kill the token, put it on something else, and they get that +1/+1 effect. This is a great effect, and the more we have, the better it's going to get. We have the Underworld Cookbook. We can discard a card to make food, or force, sacrifice it, return to our creature card from our graveyard to our hand. So we can pitch the cards or lands we don't need, maybe, and get food, and then later down the line get a creature back. And then Witch's Oven, tap it, sacrifice creature to get a food. If the sacrifice creature's toughness was 4 or greater, create 2 foods instead. This is an interesting way to just recycle some tokens into getting some food if need be, and get us those death triggers and those, of course, triggers for food coming in. Getting into our instants and sorceries. Instants, we're playing a lot of removal because at the end of the day, Commander is a platform. It's a format all about removal. Abrupt Decay is a card I don't play a ton of, but I think it's relevant in our format because it can take out mana rocks and take out small artifacts or creatures or plenty of things. But it says you can destroy target non-land permanent for mana cost 3 or less and it can't be countered. Great. Assassin's Trophy does the same thing, but except no CMC restriction or mana value restriction. But the controller gets a basic land. We have Mortality Sphere. Hitting any non-land permanent gains 2 less to cast. If we gain life this turn, which is going to be pretty easy for us because we're going to be able to gain a ton of life. Putrefy, artifact or creature, and it can't be regenerated. And then Terra Sunder, for 2 mana, we can exile target artifact or enchantment, but if we pay the extra 2, we can exile any non-land permanent instead. So a good mix of removal, hitting most things. And it should be easier for us to hit most things. Deadly Dispute, sacrifice an artifact or a creature, so we can actually sacrifice a food for it, not just a creature token, to draw 2 and make a treasure. Heroic Intervention to protect our board. Rampage of the Clans seems like an interesting card. So we destroy all artifacts and enchantments, and for each permanent destroyed this way, its controller makes a 3/3 centaur. This is kind of cool because we have a ton of food, and our opponents have lots of things they care about. We can get rid of all their important pieces, give them 3/3 centaurs, get a bunch ourselves, and maybe come out ahead. And Second Harvest, for each token we control, put a token's copy of that onto the battlefield. So double our amount of food, double our other things. Again, try to take advantage of the amount of artifacts we have through the other means that we have. As far as sorcery goes, a lot of ramp, Cultivate, Farseek, Kadama's Reach, Nature's Lore, and Rampant Growth. We're playing the Many Partings just because it gets a basic land to our hand, but also makes us a food. Lich Knight's Conquest says we can sacrifice any number of target artifacts, and any number of artifacts, enchantments, or tokens, and return that many cards from our graveyard to the battlefield. So if our opponents knock out a lot of our creatures, we can bring them back by sacrificing foods. And we're playing Toxic Deluge for our board wipe. We pay X life, all creatures get -X/-X until it turn. It gets around Hexproof, Shroud, Indestructible. It's going to help us wipe the board. And then we're playing Overrun just to have a way, if we go wide, we have lots of tokens, and we need some way to kind of push our opponents out of the way, hit for some damage. I think Overrun can help us do it. I thought about Stampede, Overwhelming Stampede. The only thing I was worried about was we don't have a ton of giant creatures, and so I don't. How often is our Stampede going to hit for more than 3? Whereas with Overrun, we are for sure guaranteed +3/+3. So I like it. I think it's going to end up helping us out. Before we get in, and it could be that thing that, again, get us a big attack, maybe knock 1, 2, 3 players out. We're only playing the 1 planeswalker, and that's Vraska, Golgari Queen, mainly for that first ability. Sack a permanent. If we do, gain a life and draw a card. Again, sack a food that's laying around, get that. -3 can destroy a permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less, hit those mana rocks that our opponents are using. And then -9 says whenever a creature you control deals damage to a player, that player loses the game. So this could be a potential way if we go wide enough to get that emblem and potentially start knocking people out that way. Our creatures in the deck are a good mix of either things that are going to make us foods, things that are going to take advantage of us having foods, or things that take advantage of life gain. First up, we got Academy Manufacturer. Every time we would make a clue, food, or treasure, we make all of them. This is one of the best cards in our deck because then anytime we make it foods, we're making treasures as well, and that's just extra mana. Blossoming Bogwaste is another way to kind of end the game. It says whenever it attacks, we gain 2 life. Then each creature you control gains trample and a +X/+X till end of turn, where X is the number of life you've gained this turn. So it's at minimum going to be 2, but it could be 8 or 10 depending on how many foods we sacrificed or how many abilities we triggered. I like Bog Beast. I wish it was a teeny bit cheaper, but again, if we can protect it for a turn, this could help us in the game. Cauldron Familiar, the infamous other half to the Witch's Oven combo. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses a life, and we gain a life, and we can sack a food to bring it back from our graveyard to the battlefield. So basically, the way it works is you tap that oven, sacrificing Cauldron Familiar to get a food, and sack that food to bring the familiar back, and that will net you, everyone losing 1 and us gaining 1. There are probably other ways we can take advantage of that combo, but it's just a little mini combo that we have access to. Chatterfang, a fantastic commander in its own right, fields a great support role here. Anytime 1 or more tokens would be created under our control, we make that many, those tokens plus that many 1/1 squirrels, and then we can sacrifice the squirrels to potentially deal with creatures because we give that creature +X -X. So obviously once that creature's toughness goes down to 0, they're automatically sent to the graveyard. And so we can basically knock some things out, hopefully, by sacrificing those squirrels, or those squirrels can just block for us. Dina Soul Steeper feels like a great spot here. Whenever we gain life, each opponent loses that much life. So this is great because everyone's going to get hit for that 1. So this pairs really well with those effects where they say everyone loses a life and we gain a life, because then everyone's just going to lose a life again, and it'll help us kind of chunk our opponents down faster. Dockside Chef, letting us sack an artifact or a creature to draw a card. Again, we need things like this so that we can churn through our deck a little bit more. I realize I don't have Skull Clamp in this deck. If we have to see if we're making that many 1/1 tokens, maybe it's worth to have a clamp. But we'll deal with that later. Eleanor Gardner, when it comes in, we get a food. At the beginning of our end step, if we sacrifice a food this turn, we can search for a basic land and put it on the battlefield tap. So there's a little bit of ramp for 4 mana. Not too bad. Essence Warden, going to gain us a life every time a creature comes in. This is cool in conjunction with like Dina or Sanguine Bond, because we're just going to start dealing damage even when our opponent's creatures come in. Experimental Confectioner from the new set. When it comes in, we get a food, and it says whenever we sacrifice a food, we get a rat token. Well, here we go. We turn getting rid of our foods for either Eleanor's ability or for the life into getting tokens. Feasting Hobbit from the Hobbit precons. When it comes in, it has Devour Food 3. So we can sacrifice any number of foods, and it gets that many times 3 +1/+1 counters on it, and anything less than power than it can't block it. This is just a big creature that maybe can start threatening people, take somebody out. Gilded Goose, when it comes in, we get a food. We can sack a food to add a mana of any color, or pay 1 and a green to get another food. I like it. I mean, obviously early game, it makes us that mana. Late game, it's just going to produce another food for us if need be. Gumdrop Poisoner. For 1 black, we get a food, and has lifelink when it enters the battlefield. Up to 1 target creature gets -6/-6 on the turn, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn. So we sacrifice a couple foods, get some life through other abilities, put the Gumdrop in, and get down a creature. Guillaume, another great alternate commander in the deck, says at the beginning of your end step, create a number of food tokens equal to the number of non-token creatures you had in the battlefield this turn. We can pay 1, sack a food to give a creature indestructible until end of turn, and tap it. I like Guillaume. It's a 5/3 with trample. It makes its tokens, and it can protect itself and other creatures. Jahira, letting all of those foods tap for a green, is another little great, like I said, we talked about Knight of Sweet's Revenge, having them tap for green. Here's Jahira letting all tokens tap for green. That's the clues or the treasures we make. If we don't want to sacrifice them, that's any other token we have tapping for green mana. Lobelia, Defender of Bag Ends, seems like a great effect that we can use every turn. When ETBs, we can look at the top card of each opponent's library and exile those cards face down. And we can tap it's to sacrifice an artifact to either play one of those without paying its mana cost, or each opponent loses 2 life and we gain 2 life. I like this because every turn we can just be hitting our opponents for 2 or maybe potentially 3 or 4 depending on what effects we have on board. Marionette Master, one of the great ways we can take our foods and turn them into damage. When it comes in, it has Fabricate 3, so we can either put 3 +1/+1 counters on it or make 3 servos. We almost always want to put the counters on it because whenever an artifact we control is put into the graveyard, each opponent or target opponent loses life equal to its power, which would be 4 if we put the counters on it. So again, sack a food with Greta's effect, get the effect, 4 damage, 4 life lost to one of our opponents. So I like Marionette Master, and again, it's another way for us to potentially help close out the game. Mazarek, a good way for us to buff our board up. This is whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, put a counter on each creature you control. This is going to help our creatures get bigger and bigger, hurt in combat. Mirkwood Bats, whenever we create or sack a token, each opponent loses a life. Here's another one of these effects that we can stack up, as well as Nadier's Nightblade. Whenever a token we control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses a life and we gain a life. As you can see, we're using these aristocrat-style effects, but we get to use them more as well because we not only will be making creature tokens, but we'll be making food tokens as well. Peregrine Took is great for this. If one or more tokens will be made, those tokens plus an additional food are created, and we can sack 3 foods to draw a card. This is a great ability for things like Mirkwood Bats and that Agent of the Iron Throne, because then we don't have to pay the mana into the foods to sacrifice them. We just sack them, get all the abilities, and draw a card. I really love Peregrine Took for that, because I think it comes up to another level on being able to just get those sack effects for the foods, but still get that card without paying any mana. Yes, 9 life would be better out of 3 foods in some scenarios, but I like this because we're getting all those triggers and getting a card. Pippin, Warden of Isengard, 1 and tap it to make a food, 1 sack 4 foods to give all of your creatures +3/+3 and haste until end of turn. I like it again, every turn make us a food if need be, and then eventually turn it into a big benefit. Provisions Merchant, when it comes in we get a food, and then whenever it attacks, we get sack a food. If we do, attacking creatures get +1/+1 and gain trample again. Here's a way to turn our wide board of tokens or creatures if we have them and give them trample. I like this because it's going to give something like Feasting Hobbit or Rapacious Guest trample, which make them hit even harder. Rapacious Guest says that when one or more creatures do a combat damage to a player, we get food. That's great. Whenever we sack a food, we put a counter on it, which is even better. And then when it leaves the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to its power. So it has menace. We could potentially have it hit hard. And then when it comes off, somebody loses life equal to its power. I like a card like this. 3 mana, not too much in an investment in, but great benefit on the back end. Savvy Hunter. Whenever it attacks or blocks, we get a food and sack 2 foods to draw a card. Here, again, another one of these Peregrine type effects where we're getting a food, hopefully once a turn, whether we attack with it or whether we block with it, and then we can at any time sack 2 to draw a card again. This can help us get into those big loops with these effects where we're chunking out our opponents for lots of damage. Sir Ginger, she finds her way into the deck. The Meal Ender has trample, hexproof, and haste as long as an opponent controls a planeswalker, which probably won't happen all the time. But whenever another artifact you control is put into your graveyard, we put a counter on her and scry 1, and then 2 to sack it to gain life equal to its power. So this is great because it's just going to get bigger every time we either use a food or sack a food. And if it ever tries to get destroyed and we have the open mana, we can just get rid of it and gain the life equal to its power. Not a bad card with something like Sanguine Bond, because then we could hit someone for that damage. Tireless Provisioner, whenever land comes in, we get a treasure or food. This is great because we either get mana or get a food to use for other effects. Tough Cookie, who's also a food, but also is a golem. When it comes in, we get a food. 2 and a green to make a non-creature artifact we control a 4/4 until end of turn. This can turn our food into creatures if we have enough mana and help them swing. It's also not a bad idea to just make a food and start swinging and see if people are willing to trade into it. We lose something and potentially still get a trigger. They lose creature 2. And it has the ability to, 2 tap, sack it to gain 3 life. So again, it is a food. But I like things like Tough Cookie. It's an uncommon, but it feels like it's well worth it in the deck. It has lots of value. And then Veto. Again, we're going to be gaining a lot of life with the food or these effects, so why not have ways to punish our opponents? So it says whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. And then for 5 mana, we can just give all of our creatures lifelink. So try my best to, again, get us a good mix of payoffs and creation. I like the deck. I mean, obviously there's a lot of things that can be improved with testing. And I think that's the important part about this series. It's not making perfect decks. It's making great starting points to learn about a deck, how it works, and making your own changes to it. This is just my first shot. This is what I value. You may value something different, and this list is yours to do with what you want. Use it as inspiration for your list. Check your list to see some of the cards maybe I picked instead and add them to yours, whatever you want to do. I hope you enjoy my shot at Greta. And what you think down in the comments of my list. I'd love to have some conversation with you guys, and I will catch you guys next time.